The Christmas lights shimmered across polished silverware, yet all I could hear was my husband's voice cutting through the laughter. "You get nothing from me." The room roared with amusement, their eyes burning me into something smaller, weaker, disposable. I swallowed the sting, smiling as if his cruelty meant nothing. But inside, I wasn't breaking. I was calculating. For years, I had built an empire they never bothered to notice, brick by brick in the shadows. And tonight, while they toasted to my humiliation, Forbes had already printed my name on the billionaire list. They just didn't know it yet. The scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon clung to the air, wrapping itself around the glittering chandelier above us. I sat at the long mahogany table, smiling politely, my hands folded neatly in my lap. To anyone watching, I looked like the picture of a grateful wife, basking in the warmth of a family Christmas. The polished silver reflected candlelight, and my husband's family leaned into one another with rehearsed laughter that sounded more like applause than joy. I laughed too, on cue, my lips stretching into the curve they expected. But beneath the smile, my chest hollowed. They saw me through a distorted lens, as though I were some translucent object, fragile and ornamental, not real flesh and bone. Their eyes skimmed over me like a painting on the wall, something to fill the room but never worthy of attention. Every time I caught their gaze, I wondered, am I here only to complete their picture? Or am I already erased from it? I reached for my glass of wine, and the crystal trembled against my fingertips. I masked it with another polite grin, and no one noticed the faint shake of my hand. "Lauren, you should try the pecan pie," my mother-in-law said, her tone sugared but her eyes sharp. "It's the least complicated dessert, so I thought of you." The table erupted with quiet chuckles, the kind that disguise cruelty as humor. I pressed my lips together in what they thought was shyness, but inside I was screaming. Do they ever tire of the same performance? Or is this my permanent role, the fool who doesn't fight back? I leaned into my husband, brushing my hand against his sleeve, hoping for the kind of affection I once believed was ours. He shifted, barely glancing at me, his focus fixed on carving the ham like it was the only thing that mattered. The man who once whispered promises under starlit skies now treated me as a background character in his stage play. My smile faltered for a moment, and the weight of it nearly pulled me under, yet I straightened my back and reclaimed it, the same way a soldier steadies a shield before the blow. The children ran across the living room, their laughter echoing against the vaulted ceiling. Their joy made the silence at the table heavier. I listened to the sound of forks clinking and glasses touching, the rhythm of celebration that excluded me. I laughed at the right jokes, nodded at the right pauses, but every breath felt borrowed. My skin prickled as though every pair of eyes dissected me, and still, no one really looked. I caught my reflection in the polished silver tray beside the candlesticks. The woman staring back at me seemed perfect, composed, graceful. Yet her eyes betrayed her. They shimmered with something raw, an ache that couldn't be concealed by lipstick or high heels. I held her gaze for a second too long and thought, is that woman me, or the stranger they've built in my place? As the evening wound tighter, conversations overlapped like threads weaving a net meant to hold me down. My husband's sister leaned forward, her diamond earrings swaying. "I read an article today about self-made women," she said, her lips curling. "Can you imagine the discipline it must take to build something from nothing?" Her eyes flicked toward me. "Not everyone has that, of course." Her laughter was crisp, designed to cut. I returned her gaze, unblinking, letting the silence stretch longer than was comfortable. She shifted slightly, her confidence flickering. I didn't speak, but the weight of my stare was louder than any retort. "You think I am nothing, but one day that word will burn you." The candles dripped wax onto the white tablecloth, as if marking time, counting down to an ending no one anticipated but me. My husband lifted his glass, his eyes narrowing, his lips curling into the smirk I had come to know too well. The room hushed, anticipation swirling like smoke. I already knew what was coming. I could feel it in the way he tilted his chin, savoring the cruelty before it was spoken. "Lauren," he said, his voice rich with mockery, "you get nothing from me." The words dropped into the silence like shards of glass, splintering through the false warmth. For a heartbeat, I thought I might crumble, that my carefully arranged mask would shatter into 1,000 pieces. Their laughter followed like a chorus, filling the space where my dignity once sat. But I didn't break. Instead, a pulse of fire surged through me, searing away the numbness. It wasn't pain anymore. It was clarity. The world slowed, their laughter echoing like distant thunder. I looked at him, at all of them, and smiled. My lips didn't tremble this time. My eyes didn't water. They thought they had pierced me. But in truth, they had freed me. For the first time in years, I felt awake. His words weren't a knife. They were a spark. I glanced around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. Some looked away quickly, unsettled by something they couldn't name. They expected defeat, but what they saw was defiance. I said nothing, but silence has its own language, and mine screamed louder than their laughter ever could. I raised my glass, steady now, and held it there. The lights glittered against the rim, and my reflection smiled back. Not the stranger I once feared, but the woman who had waited patiently for this moment. The room seemed to lean back, uneasy. They didn't yet know what had shifted, but I did. The game had just changed, and the rules would never be the same. The house was quiet after the dinner, the kind of silence that follows cruelty. Laughter had long since faded into bedrooms and hallways, but its echo still clung to the walls. I slipped out of my dress, folded it neatly, and set it aside like armor no longer needed. Alone in the guest room they had given me, small, dimly lit, with floral wallpaper that smelled faintly of dust, I finally allowed my smile to fall away. My face felt heavy, as though it had carried more weight than bone should bear. I opened my laptop, its glow the only light in the room. The blue-white screen washed over me, chasing away the remnants of humiliation that still burned in my chest. Numbers filled the display. Balance sheets, profit and loss statements, projections stretching into years I had built with precision. My fingers skimmed across them, tracing each line like it was a promise I had whispered to myself long ago. Every dollar recorded was more than currency. It was proof that while they sneered, I built. While they doubted, I advanced. And while they laughed, I prepared. The bitterness of their words replayed in my mind. You get nothing from me. Yet here, in the solitude of my screen, I knew the truth. I had never needed anything from him. I had everything I needed within my own creation. The faint tremor in my hand stilled as I moved from one spreadsheet to another, watching the numbers rise and stretch upward like vines reaching for light. Their ridicule had been the soil, and from it I had grown something extraordinary. I leaned back, listening to the creaks of the old house. Somewhere down the hall, my husband's laugh echoed faintly, muffled by walls but sharp enough to pierce. He thought he had broken me. He thought his words had cemented my place in shadows. He didn't realize I had been working in those shadows for years, and soon they would become the very stage where his downfall was announced. I clicked a small icon in the corner of my screen. The familiar logo pulsed alive, a silver vault door slowly rotating before opening. Legacy Vault. My creation, my secret, my future. I whispered the name to myself like a mantra. Legacy Vault wasn't just a platform, it was a fortress, an infrastructure designed to manage assets, investments, and data with a kind of elegance no one had dared attempt before. Every investor who had brushed me aside would one day realize they'd underestimated not just a woman, but this woman. The vault opened with layers of code scrolling down the screen, strings of commands I had memorized like poetry. Behind each line hid accounts, partnerships, shell corporations tied back to me in ways invisible to the untrained eye. They thought I was decoration at their table. They never knew I was the architect behind walls too high for them to see. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother-in-law. "Thank you for keeping the peace tonight. You know how important appearances are to us." The words were drenched in condescension, wrapped in faux gratitude. I didn't reply. I simply smiled because while she cared for appearances, I was about to reshape reality itself. Scrolling deeper, I opened a dashboard displaying international investments, green energy startups in Scandinavia, biotech firms in Singapore, and a handful of quiet real estate acquisitions across New York. Each tile on the screen pulsed with quiet power, invisible to the family upstairs who believed my worth was measured in silence. They couldn't imagine the empire growing beneath their feet. For years, I had listened, nodded, played the dutiful role. I had memorized their cruelty, filed it away in the same system where I stored contracts and shares. Their voices became fuel, their arrogance the foundation of my fire. And now, all those years of patience coiled like a spring, ready to unbind. I rubbed my temples, exhaustion and exhilaration colliding. Legacy Vault was more than a project, it was a mirror. In its polished code and clean numbers, I saw the woman they refused to acknowledge, sharp, resilient, dangerous in her silence. Then a new notification slid into the corner of my screen, not from Legacy Vault, not from an investor, an email. The subject line glowed like a flare in the night. Invitation to Forbes Billionaire's list. My breath caught. The words blurred for a second before settling into focus. My name, my company, my empire. Forbes had noticed what my husband's family refused to see. I pressed my palm against the laptop, as though touching the proof of my existence. Heat rushed through me, not humiliation this time, but vindication. Their table, their laughter, their words, none of it mattered anymore. My story would not be whispered in shadows, it would be printed in bold across pages read by millions. Upstairs, I heard the muffled sound of footsteps, the door creaking open and shut. Life in the house carried on as if nothing had changed, but everything had. In the quiet of that guest room, the world tilted, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of my silence transform into power. I closed the laptop gently, the screen dimming until the room was left in darkness again. My reflection faintly shimmered in the window, but this time it didn't look hollow. It looked alive. The game had begun, and they didn't even know they were pieces on my board. In the days that followed, my reflection became my most persistent companion. Every mirror in that house felt like a stage, and each glance revealed a different actress playing my part. Sometimes I saw the dutiful wife, the one who lowered her gaze when spoken to and let silence speak in place of rebellion. Other times, in the corner of my eye, I caught the architect, the strategist, whose empire thrived beneath their notice. I began to wonder if even I could tell them apart anymore. I told myself lies as easily as I told them truths. "I'm just his wife," I whispered one morning as I smoothed the sheets on our bed. "I belong here." The words were sweetened poison, and even as I said them, I didn't believe them. But perhaps that was the point. If I convinced myself long enough, maybe the cracks wouldn't show. Maybe I wouldn't slip. But then came the nights when I sat in front of the vanity, staring into the glass. "You're more than all of them," I told the stranger, staring back. "You own them, even if they don't know it yet." My lips formed the words, but something in my eyes faltered. Did I really believe I was in control, or was I only building a tower of glass that might shatter with a single blow? The contradiction became intoxicating. To them, I was invisible. To myself, I was unstoppable. Yet each mask I wore pressed heavier against my skin. I wondered, if I took it off, would there be anything left underneath? My laughter at their jokes felt rehearsed. My tears in solitude felt scripted. It was as though I were narrating a story I couldn't trust, slipping between truths and illusions. One evening, as I passed the hall mirror, I paused. The woman looking back seemed taller, sharper, her smile thinner. I raised my hand slowly, palm brushing against the cold surface, aligning my fingers with hers. "Which one of us is lying?" I whispered. The reflection didn't answer, but the longer I stared, the more I swore she tilted her head differently than I did. A chill ran through me. For the first time, I wasn't certain whether I was watching myself or someone else entirely. The dissonance grew unbearable. If I was two people, then one had to die. That thought followed me like a shadow until I decided to act. It was no longer enough to live in halves. If they only wanted to see a weak, ornamental wife, I would give them one version, and then I would reveal another, one that would haunt them. I scheduled a press conference under the guise of a company announcement. No one in my husband's family even knew I was capable of holding such an event. That ignorance alone thrilled me. I chose a sleek black suit, a color I had never worn around them, and slid a blonde wig over my dark hair. My makeup reshaped the contours of my face. A voice modulator, subtle but effective, altered my tone into something unrecognizable. When I stepped onto the stage, cameras flashed like lightning against storm clouds. Reporters shifted, puzzled. They expected someone else, perhaps a spokesperson, perhaps no one of consequence. Instead, I gave them her, the version of me that existed beyond their comprehension. I cleared my throat, my altered voice filling the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, today you will hear from the architect of Legacy Vault." Questions buzzed in the air, but I pressed forward with poise. I outlined the platform's innovations, its reach, its unprecedented growth. I watched them scribble furiously, their confusion mounting. Who was this woman claiming authority over a company no one had ever connected to Lauren, the ornamental wife? The disguise gave me power. For the first time, I spoke freely, unburdened by their labels. When the press conference ended, I turned to leave. Whispers chased me down the corridor like shadows. Who is she? Where did she come from? Could she really be the founder? Their doubt was my camouflage, and I relished it. But as I stepped toward the exit, a man leaned forward from the crowd, his eyes locked on me with unsettling certainty. He didn't shout, didn't point, didn't break the illusion for the room. Instead, he slipped close enough that only I could hear him. "I know you," he whispered, his breath warm against the side of my face. "You're not who they think you are." My body went rigid. The words struck like ice, sharper than any insult at a dinner table. He didn't just see me, he recognized me. The mask, the wig, the altered voice. It hadn't fooled him. For a moment, the crowd blurred, the flash of cameras fading into background noise. It was only him and me, predator and prey, locked in recognition. And for the first time since I began weaving my double life, I wasn't sure which role I was playing. The press conference haunted me long after I returned home. The stranger's whisper echoed in my skull. "I know you." His words had fractured the fragile line I drew between my masks, and I carried that fracture into every room, every hallway of the house. My reflection no longer frightened me as much as the thought that someone else could see through me. The family carried on as though nothing had changed. They laughed at their routines, their petty victories, their traditions polished to look like loyalty. But I saw through it now, sharper than ever. They weren't a family. They were a boardroom with bloodlines, each member calculating, bartering, betraying. And I was the piece they had all agreed to sacrifice. Then one evening, as I poured myself a glass of wine in the dim kitchen, I noticed a shadow leaning against the doorway. It was Daniel, my husband's younger brother. He had always hovered on the edges, quieter, overlooked. The kind of man people forgot was in the room. He wore that same half-smile now, his hands buried in his pockets. "You don't drink much," he said softly, as though he were testing the ground before stepping onto it. I shrugged. Maybe I should start. His eyes lingered on me longer than expected. Then, in a voice so calm it unnerved me, he said, "You shouldn't be here. Not in this house. Not in this family." I stiffened. And yet, here I am. He studied me, tilting his head as though reading a book only he understood. "They don't see you, they don't want to, but I do." He pulled something from his pocket, a small flash drive, and set it on the counter between us. My heartbeat quickened. "What is this?" "Proof," he whispered. "I've been keeping it for you, waiting for the moment you'd need it." I stared at the tiny object, my mind spinning. Proof of what? He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "Of how they've been cutting you out, how they erased you from everything, financials, legal records, even photographs. I have recordings, documents, conversations they thought no one else could hear." The room tilted slightly, the weight of his words crashing down on me. For years I had believed the betrayal was casual, a laugh here, an insult there, but this was systematic, deliberate. They hadn't just dismissed me, they had conspired to erase me. I reached for the flash drive, but he covered it with his hand, his eyes piercing mine. "Lauren," he said quietly, "you are not alone. You never were. I've seen too much to keep quiet any longer." The world stilled. For so long, isolation had been my armor, but now it cracked under the realization that someone had been watching, protecting, preserving my place in the shadows. I whispered, almost to myself, "I thought I had no one." His voice was steady. "Now you do." The silence between us deepened, thick with the weight of an unspoken alliance. He slid the flash drive toward me, then walked away, leaving me with more than evidence. He left me with something I hadn't felt in years, certainty that I wasn't fighting this war alone. Later that night, in the sanctuary of my room, I opened the files. Voices spilled into my headphones. My mother-in-law's clipped tone, my husband's smug chuckle, the rustle of papers. "She doesn't belong in this family. She doesn't get a cent. Erase her. We'll make it clean." The words hit harder than any insult thrown across a holiday table. They weren't mocking me. They were erasing me. In another file, I saw scanned documents, legal amendments that had my name struck through in ink. In photographs, my face had been cropped from frames, as if I had never existed beside them. I removed the headphones and pressed my hands to my temples. Betrayal wasn't just something they did casually. It was their craft, their inheritance. They had plotted, schemed, and executed their erasure of me, like a business transaction. And I had smiled through it, carrying trays of wine, hosting their dinners, unaware that in their world I was already a ghost. The fury that rose inside me wasn't hot. It was cold, steady, crystalline. For the first time, I understood them fully. They weren't family. They were adversaries. And if they wanted me erased, then I would etch my name where they could never scratch it out, into history itself. I closed the files and looked at my laptop. Forbes' invitation still sat in my inbox, a beacon of recognition they couldn't touch. Slowly, deliberately, I typed my reply. Confirmed. I will attend. Then, leaning back in my chair, I let out a laugh. Low at first, then sharper, cutting through the silence of the room. The laugh of someone who had been underestimated too long, someone who had been pushed to the edge only to find the view was better from there. "Now," I whispered to the empty room, "let's see how you like my erasure." I closed the laptop with a snap, the decision sealed. It's time for the Forbes list. The ballroom shimmered with light, a constellation of chandeliers glittering above the crowd. Rows of velvet chairs faced the stage, cameras stationed like sentinels at every corner. The air buzzed with expectation, with the kind of reverence reserved for royalty and legends. I stepped onto the stage, my heels clicking softly against the polished floor, the murmur of the audience rising, then falling into silence. Behind me, a massive screen displayed the words everyone had come to witness: Forbes Billionaire's list, new inductees. The announcer's voice carried through the speakers, steady and celebratory. Tonight we honor those who have reshaped industries, those who built legacies from determination and brilliance. Please welcome our newest member, Lauren Hayes. Applause thundered across the room. Cameras exploded in white bursts, catching every angle of me as I approached the podium. My heart should have raced, but instead it beat with slow, deliberate calm. This was no accident, no stroke of fortune. This moment was a calculation years in the making, sharpened by every humiliation, every betrayal I had endured. In the front row, I saw them. My husband, my mother-in-law, his sisters, the same family who had laughed over holiday wine, who had dismissed me as useless, ornamental, a placeholder. Their faces were pale now, their eyes wide, their mouths slightly parted. The words they had once whispered, "She has nothing, she is nothing," seemed to echo around them, but the world had rewritten those lines tonight. I didn't need to speak. Forbes had spoken for me. I took the glass plaque they handed me, the weight of it firm and undeniable in my hands. I turned slightly, letting the light catch its edges, reflecting into the crowd. My lips curved into a smile, not for them, but for myself, for the girl who had once believed she was invisible at their table. I scanned the audience, lingering on my husband. His hands trembled in his lap. He rose slow and unsteady and began walking toward the stage. His movements were careful, almost desperate, as though each step might crumble beneath him. His eyes begged to meet mine, to claim some connection, some recognition. But I turned. The hem of my dress swept behind me as I pivoted away from him, my back a wall he could not scale. Gasps rippled through the room, but I didn't falter. I walked toward the waiting reporters, toward the future I had carved alone. Behind me, I heard his voice falter, just a broken syllable, a plea swallowed by applause. I didn't look back. The night unfolded like a symphony of irony. The very people who had conspired to erase me were forced to sit, silent and powerless, as I was etched into history in real time. I didn't need to argue with them anymore. Their stunned faces, projected on screens around the ballroom, told the story better than I ever could. As the event wound down, I made my way through a corridor lined with gold-framed mirrors. Each reflection of me seemed sharper, clearer, more certain. Gone was the hesitant woman who once questioned her worth. What remained was a figure they could no longer ignore, a woman who had been underestimated and had turned that underestimation into her greatest weapon. When I emerged outside, the night air was cool, cutting against my skin like truth. The city glowed around me, skyscrapers rising like monuments of ambition. I walked toward the waiting car, each step measured, purposeful. My family trailed behind, but not beside me. For once, they weren't part of my story. They were the audience, forced to watch it unfold. Reporters swarmed as I reached the car, their voices colliding into a wall of questions. "Lauren, how does it feel? Did your family know about your company? What's next for Legacy Vault?" I offered them a smile, silent, letting the mystery linger. Power wasn't in answering, it was in withholding. Silence was my language now, and they leaned in closer to hear it. I slipped into the car, closing the door with a soft thud that felt louder than any applause. The driver pulled away, and the city blurred past the tinted glass. My phone vibrated in my purse. I pulled it out, expecting congratulations, perhaps a message from an investor, a note from Forbes itself. Instead, it was a single line from an unknown number. "You've won." "But tell me, Lauren, do you know the price of victory?" The words lingered on the screen, sharp and cold. I stared at them, my reflection flickering across the glass of the phone. For the first time that night, my breath caught. Someone was watching me. Someone who knew this wasn't the end. I set the phone down slowly, my fingers tightening around the plaque in my lap. Outside, the city lights pulsed like warning signals, like stars burning out. My smile held, but my mind whispered the question I had tried to bury. What have I unleashed by stepping into the light? The night after the Forbes Gala, I sat in my apartment, the glass plaque still resting on the table before me. The city hummed outside, its lights stretching endlessly, but I felt no urge to bask in the glow. The recognition, the applause, the power. They had filled the void for a moment, but now the silence pressed in heavier than before. Victory had been intoxicating, but it was also exhausting. The truth seeped into my bones. I hadn't fought for them. Not really, I had fought for myself. And now, having won, I had to decide what winning meant. Legacy Vault pulsed on my laptop screen, its interface glowing like the heartbeat of everything I had built. Numbers flickered across it. Billions in assets, partnerships, potential futures. For years, it had been my shield, my hidden weapon. Now it was my crown. But I no longer wanted to wear it as armor in battle. I wanted it to be something else, something beyond revenge. My cursor hovered over the command keys. Slowly, deliberately, I began redirecting. Funds moved, percentages shifted, locks unsealed. By morning, Legacy Vault had transformed from a fortress into a foundation. Entire portfolios were rerouted into trusts and charitable initiatives. Scholarships for women erased from their families, funding for startups silenced by arrogance, seed money for dreamers mocked at their tables. I watched the transfers complete, the numbers dissolving like chains falling away. It wasn't about erasing them anymore. It was about rewriting myself. For the first time, I felt light. My chest lifted with each confirmation window, with each sum diverted towards something larger than me. I had carried anger like an inheritance, but now I let it go. What remained was clarity, and in clarity, I found freedom. That afternoon, I walked through Central Park, the winter air biting against my skin, the trees skeletal but dignified. I wore no diamonds, no armor of status, only a wool coat and a quiet smile. People passed without recognition, and I relished it. To be unseen was no longer a curse. It was a choice. A small group of students sat huddled near a bench, laptops open, their voices animated as they pitched ideas to one another. I lingered just long enough to hear their dreams. An app to track clean water access, a platform to connect low-income families with tutors. Their passion reminded me of myself in the beginning, raw and unshaped. I slipped an anonymous card into one of their notebooks, an access code to a seed fund from Legacy Vault. No name attached, no need for credit. Let them rise on their own. By evening, I returned home, pausing before the mirror in the hallway. The woman staring back no longer frightened me. Her eyes held calm instead of doubt, warmth instead of rage. I smiled, and for a fleeting second, I swore the reflection smiled wider, as though it belonged to someone else entirely. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with awe. Was this still me? Or had I birthed someone new? The question lingered as the mirror shimmered in the fading light, the smile in the glass carrying a secret I couldn't name. I stepped away, but its echo followed me into the night. In the days that followed, the storm around Forbes began to subside. My family's shame simmered in silence, their names dragged in whispers through social circles, but I didn't linger on it. I didn't answer their calls, didn't open their letters. For the first time, I wasn't defined by their approval or their disdain. Their world was small, and I had stepped beyond it. I began to travel. Quietly, without entourage, without headlines. A coastal town in Portugal where fishermen taught me how to mend nets. A village in Nepal where children ran barefoot through the mountains, laughing with a purity I had long forgotten. A library in a forgotten corner of Greece where I read books that had nothing to do with finance or power. With every step away from their gaze, I stitched together a life that was mine alone. One morning in Kyoto, as cherry blossoms began to fall like confetti on the wind, I stood on a bridge at dawn. The mist curled over the river, and the horizon glowed with the soft birth of day. For the first time, I didn't think about Forbes, or revenge, or the sharp edges of betrayal. I thought only of the quiet, of the simple fact that I was still here, breathing, alive. I closed my eyes and let the cool air fill me. The journey I had endured felt like a map carved into my skin, from the depths of humiliation, through the fire of revenge, across the cliffs of doubt, into the open sky of release. I had walked through hell, brushed against heaven, fallen into shadows, and emerged, not unscathed, but whole. As the sun broke fully over the horizon, I stepped forward, the bridge beneath me solid, the mist parting like a curtain. Each footfall felt like a vow, not to them, not to the past, but to myself. I did not need their acknowledgement. I did not need their love. Power wasn't in money or titles, or even in the silence I once wielded. Power was in choosing. And I had chosen this, a dawn of my own making. The mist swallowed me gently as I walked, my figure fading into light. Behind me, the river flowed steady, carrying away the remnants of the woman they had tried to erase. Ahead of me, the horizon stretched endless, unclaimed.